Welcome to all of you from all around the world to the Nobel Peace Center here in Oslo. We are celebrating the Nobel Peace Prize laureate of 2020, the World Food Programme. The Nobel Committee stated at the announcement that the World Food Programme received the Nobel Peace Prize for its effort to combat hunger, for its contribution to bettering conditions for peace in conflict-affected areas, and for acting as a driving force in efforts to prevent the use of hunger as a weapon of war and conflict. Therefore, through a series of different events and exhibitions, we are setting the light on World Food Programme's very important work and exploring the relationship between food and peace. In today's dialogue, which is the second dialogue in a series of 4, we, together with the World Food Programme, have gathered top-notch peace researchers, practitioners, and policymakers to discuss current evidence on the link between food security and peace. We will also discuss efforts to expand the evidence base and devise a systematic method to measure peace contributions. I'm very proud and somewhat starstruck to introduce our amazing panel of today. Valerie Guarnieri, you have been the World Food Programme Assistant Executive Director since January 2018. In this role, you lead cutting-edge program and policy development towards ending hunger, spearheading World Food Programme's efforts to ensure protection and inclusion, expand school meals and nutrition programs, empower women, build resilient food systems, to name a few of the roles you are responsible for. Before World Food Programme, you worked in the US government, at the National Security Council, and the US Agency for International Development. Very much welcome. Dan Smith, hello.
Hello.
You are the director of SIPRI and has a long record of research publications on a wide range of conflict and peace issues. You are author of successive editions of Atlases of Politics, of War and Peace, and of the Middle East. And you also blog on international politics at your own well-known blog. In Norway, you are well known as the director of International Peace Research Institute here in Oslo from 1993 to 2001. Warmly welcome. And then Dr. Stephen Sverre Omamo is the world. Hello, you're there. Good to see you today. You are the World Food Programme's country representative for Ethiopia, to which you were appointed in June 2018. Prior to this, you were the Deputy Director of Policy and Programme and Coordinator of Food System Strategy, Policy and Supports in World Food Programme's headquarters in Rome. You too has a long and distinguished career from both Kenya and African institutions. Warmly welcome to you as well. Next, we have Comfort Aero. Hello to you. The Interim Vice President for the Crisis Group since January 2021, and also still acting African Program Director. In your role as Vice President of the Crisis Group, you assist the President in leading the organization's programs and represents Crisis Group to internal and external stakeholders. Comfort also sits on the editorial board of various journals, including International Peacekeeping. Welcome to you as well. And then
Thank you very much.
Betty Bigome. And there you are. Hi. You have played a key role in conflict resolutions in Africa, leading peace and humanitarian efforts in northern Uganda, and currently in your role as Uganda's special envoy to peace process in South Sudan. Most recently, you served as a Senior Director for Fragility, Conflict and Violence in the World Bank. And prior to that, you served as State Minister for Water Resources in the Ugandan cabinet and also as a member of the parliament. You have received a number of awards honoring your long-standing commitment to peace and humanitarian affairs throughout your career. Thank you so much for joining us today. Well, now we'll go to the panel and then start with you, Valerie. Since World Food Programme was awarded the 2020 Nobel Peace Prize, there has been much greater attention to the link between food security and peace. Valerie, how do you see World Food Programme's role and ambition with regard to contributing to peace? And what evidence is World Food Programme basing this on?
Well, thank you so much, Kirsty, for this opportunity. And the Nobel Prize really brought much needed attention to WFP's work with partners around the world, fighting hunger, but also to conflict and hunger and the link between those and the need to break that chain. And that recognition is just so important when you think that 60% of the 690 million hungry people in the world live in conflict-affected countries. 8 out of the 10 world's worst food crises are driven by conflict and insecurity, and 2/3 of our work as the World Food Programme is taking place in conflict countries. So this recognition is key. But the Nobel Peace Prize Award also presents a great responsibility, a responsibility to do more and do better by way of people caught up in conflict and insecurity. And with WFP, it also calls upon us to ensure that we're informing the global discourse and bringing an operational people-centered voice to that discourse. So, we know that conflict is the main obstacle to achieving SDG 2 or ending hunger. And it's the area of the global goals that WFP contributes most directly to. And so we have a vital role to play, a role that we play in partnerships and really drawing on the vast partnerships that are deployed to address conflict and hunger, the operational reach that we have, the knowledge and the trust of the communities that we bring, and our ability to innovate and bring interventions to scale. And all of this is foundational both to addressing hunger and to addressing conflict and the needs of people caught up in conflict. So we enter this knowing that we need to really understand how our work is impacted by conflict, but also how the delivery of food assistance can impact on the conflict dynamics. And this really requires a careful and deliberate approach that's informed by a robust understanding and evidence of what works and what doesn't work. So, we're not a peace-building organization per se, and we come into the realm of conflict and peace first with an aim to do no harm, but also to do good. And that starts with conflict sensitivity. We need to plan and undertake our work in a way that promotes peace, puts the needs and desires of people at the center. And in order to do this, we recognized that we needed to expand our peace and conflict-related knowledge, our skill sets, our capacities, our partnerships, and our systems, and to tackle that evidence gap, Kirsty, that you referred to. So in 2018, we launched into a partnership with the Stockholm International Peace and Research Institute. And, this partnership has really been very helpful for us and for SIPRI as well to bring the knowledge and the operations further. We started with a look at 4 countries so we could better understand together what WFP's current and potential role in getting to peace was. And through that, we wanted to understand what the capability we already had was, but also how through our reach we could contribute further. And we found through those studies that by providing economic empowerment, by giving strengthening the citizen state link, by building community level cohesion, these were all ways in which we can contribute to peace. We're already contributing it, but could do it more if we moved forward in a more systematic way. And a great example of that is some of the border work between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, where we know that water scarcity has been a source of tension between those border communities for years. And by providing food assistance to these communities while they worked in engaging on irrigation canal repairs and construction that were vital to both communities, we were able to increase production, reduce hunger, and create positive means in which the communities were working together, so reducing these tensions. So hence, it's often about the how we work in addition to the what we do. In this next phase that we're engaging with SIPRI, we're looking to expand that research to 8 more countries, but also to do deep dives on the links of conflict to climate, to cash, to gender, and to stabilization. Now, this work has been a little bit impacted by COVID, as you can imagine. Some of the travel that the researchers need to do hasn't all been undertaken yet. But before COVID really disrupted that, we were able to do a look at some of the work in Colombia, and there WFP and partners have been working toward ex-combatants and reintegrate them into community life. And we found very explicitly through the research that by engaging ex-combatants in productive projects, we give them a sense of engagement, a sense of occupation, a hope for the future, and the structure that they needed to return to civilian life and engage in a more appropriate way with communities. In Nigeria, some of the early evidence, that's one of the additional 8 countries looking at, in Northeast Nigeria, we're exploring how food assistance contributes to reducing vulnerability to extremism. And by meeting urgent needs, we're seeing how we can be minimizing the opportunities for extremist groups like Boko Haram to use that access to basic fundamental needs as a recruiting tool. And these are some of the areas that we're going to be looking into further as we seek to further build the evidence. Thank you so much, Kirsty.
Thank you, Valerie. That's really interesting to hear, the 2 ways link between peace building, as you actually do with your support, and then also how you have to be careful not to spearhead conflict in your work. I think I was just wondering, what are the gaps that currently exist in your knowledge, understanding on this, and how do you intend to address them further going on?
Well, one of the big gaps really is on, how to measure this. And that's something that we're really seeking to further understand in this next phase of the partnership. Basically, if you can't measure it, how do you show that it's happening, and how do you use that evidence to further improve your work? So we've launched on an effort, again working with SIPRI, but also working with member states who have some knowledge and expertise in this area, to develop a peace performance measurement system that puts engagement with affected populations at its core. And we've set up a series of internal and external reference groups to help ensure that measurement approach is builds on what's already out there, but also integrates into our own system, so that we're not duplicating and replicating work. So we've done country pilots in Bangladesh and in the Philippines, and we really hope to learn from some of these. How can we more concretely show how to measure that peace effort, so that we can be deliberately designing our models and engaging our partnerships in order to achieve specific peace outcomes. So that's really a key area of our work moving ahead.
Thank you so much, Valerie. We'll come back to you in the panel afterwards, but now we will hear from Dan Smith. And I think that's, we were actually hearing from you by Valerie talking about the Stockholm Institute where you work. And I believe the SIPRI's partnership with the UN World Food Programme is the first time you have this kind of partnership. How and when did the connecting points between food insecurity and human insecurity become clear to you? And how did you go about to unearthing the evidence of this?
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me onto this panel, and thank you very much for the question. There's really two directions here that I could point to. On the first one, hunger and famine, along with displacement, are amongst the serious, big, long-lasting consequences of armed conflict. And I think that's easy to recognize, easy to understand, tragic and painful to get close to. And when Valerie is talking about what WFP's current workload is, then that in 2/3 of the countries where it's engaged, it is engaging conflict-affected countries, then this is the linkage there is in some senses, from an intellectual point of view, is straightforward and easy to understand. The second part of it, the second direction, is it's sense in the opposite direction. I mean, violent conflict causes hunger. Good, fair enough, got that clear. Does hunger also cause violent conflict? Is there a connection in that direction?
Protection.
Coming into that from my point of view and from SIPRI's point of view was really to do with understanding food insecurity as part of or as one of the transmission mechanisms between, for example, the effects of climate change and political instability and violent conflict, or the effects of an economic shock, a drastic downturn in the terms of trade, or a major increase in world prices for staple foods, and how that led through food insecurity into risks of instability and potentially violent conflict. And there's really a quite considerable body of research on this, and I think the connection is well established. What you have to understand is that it is not necessarily a simple linear A causes B effect that we're looking for. It's rather about what are the background conditions which are more, or in the positive scenario, less conducive to violent conflict. What are the connections between different features on the social and political landscape, different aspects of experience of the effects of climate change or other environmental damage? How do these interact with each other to generate the conditions in which, for example, it really only takes one or two irresponsible leaders and a relatively small number, just a few hundred people with access to weapons, and you have violent conflict on your hands. And I think that there is a quite solid body of research which establishes that. In addition, in the past 4 to 5 years before the COVID-19 pandemic, world hunger was already on the increase. This was being tracked. It's since about 2015, and it's a reversal of the positive developments that there had been since 1990. We had 2.5 decades of world hunger reducing. We've now had 4 or 5 years of world hunger increasing. And again, the research which has been done, and in this case, not by SIPRI, by the World Food Programme itself, by a Food and Agriculture Organization, by IFAD and by others, has shown very clearly that the two big driving forces behind the increase in world hunger are climate change and violent conflict. Peace, food security is foundational for peace, and peace is foundational for food security. And it's this two-way linkage which needs to be understood both in programming and in policy making. In the specific partnership with World Food Programme, when we've got that starting point, our question is the one that Valerie has already been addressing. Our question is the World Food Programme contributing to improving the prospects for peace? Is anything that it is doing having a negative effect on the prospects for peace? How can we recognize these and what can we do about it? And for this, you ask, how do we go about unearthing the evidence? It is detailed research in which in-country research is an extraordinarily large part of it. And we need to talk a lot and focus a lot on what the experience of beneficiaries is and the communities in which they live in order to understand properly what impact World Food programs and projects are having. Valerie mentioned the importance of addressing conflict sensitivity issues to be sure of doing no harm, to be sure of avoiding any negative effects on the prospects for peace. We also, in our studies, we concluded with recommending that it's very important for the WFP, big as it is, to understand it cannot do everything alone. So the approach to partnerships is extraordinarily important. And it's important to engage local partners into the planning of projects and the planning of the long-term approach of WFP in a country. And I think the third big thing to come out was, as Valerie has also alluded to, the importance of getting better at understanding, assessing the impact. World Food Programme is, in my view, really astonishingly good at measuring the impact of its work in terms of food assistance, in terms of how much food does it get to how many beneficiaries, what impact does this have on their nutrition, on their health, and so on. What it has not actually paid attention to, and this is what we really hope to be helping them with in the coming period, is how to understand and how to assess the impact of those activities on peace. If peace and food security are closely related to each other, we need to understand that relationship in practice. We need to understand how food security helps build peace and how peace helps build food security. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. And as Valerie also said, what gets measured gets managed. So I would assume that your partnership will help the broader global conversation on development and peace altogether. As you said, how all these kind of things impact on each other. Okay, thank you. We will get back to you, Dan, when afterwards in the panel. Now, Stephen Vere Omamo. I understand you call yourself Vere, and you are the country director and the head of World Food Programme's operation in Ethiopia, where food insecurity, climate change, and insecurity all come together. How do you see the relation between food and peace in your context?
Regarding your question, the point to recognize up front is that chronic poverty and climate-related shocks are actually the most important drivers of food insecurity and food emergencies in Ethiopia. At any given time, large numbers of vulnerable people are being hit by economic shocks, and significant parts of the country are being struck by drought, flooding, pest invasions, and other natural hazards, leading to major displacement and hardship. At present, the challenge we face is severe flooding. In some places, this is literally right on the heels of devastating drought. So the lion's share of the 17.5 million people who are estimated to require humanitarian assistance this year fall into these categories. But that said, there is no doubt, as the government itself points out, that insecurity and conflict are very important in many parts of the country. The ongoing hostilities in Tigray are the sharpest and the most prominent illustration of this. So in Ethiopia, like in most places, as both Valerie and Dan have mentioned, the greater and more widespread are insecurity and conflict, the greater and more widespread is vulnerability to food insecurity. That is crystal clear. But it's also clear that in most of the contexts in which we work, the relationship between insecurity and vulnerability is not direct. It is mediated or conditioned by other factors and forces. And I think both Valerie and Dan have mentioned this. This is important for today's discussion because these conditioning factors can be influenced by investment and action. including by food assistance. Now, in the largely rural areas where we work here in Ethiopia, there are two especially important conditioning factors. The first one has already been mentioned, and this is access to and control of natural resources, especially water and also soil. And second, access to markets for goods and services, with financial services actually being especially important, we find. In our experience, it is the impact of insecurity on these factors that is most damaging to food security in the short, medium, and long term. Our analysis in late 2019 suggests that insecurity-related food insecurity could have added as much as $375 million to food assistance expenditures that year. We estimate the humanitarian component of these insecurity-driven food assistance expenditures to be almost $290 million, or 22% of the 2019 humanitarian response plan. Now, a useful way of thinking about these insecurity-driven food expenditures is as implicit measures of food security-related dividends to peace in Ethiopia. Those potential dividends, in our view, are not small at all. Now, our analysis and experience also suggests that insecurity seems to matter most at high levels of underlying vulnerability, as importantly do these conditioning factors. That is, peace is most important and most beneficial for the most food insecure populations. The greater the underlying vulnerability to food insecurity, the more potent is the impact of insecurity. And the greater would appear to be the returns to investments to address conditioning factors and thereby blunt the impacts of insecurity. This, we feel, is why food assistance is so important. And this is how we feel it is linked to peace in many contexts. Now, just to be clear, by food assistance, I mean not just transfers of food commodities to hungry people, but rather that set of multifaceted instruments, programs, and delivery platforms that empower vulnerable and food insecure people and the communities they live in to access nutritious food. Now, we are confident that in many of the areas where we work, there is what we think of as a sweet spot, where the prospect of peace can meet enhanced access to and control of natural resources, especially water, and expanded access to markets, yielding major benefits for households and community. We have a category of food assistance initiatives that operate within that envisioned sweet spot. One activity, the Rural Resilience Initiative, or R4 for short, focuses on vulnerable smallholder farmers. The other activity, the Satellite-Based Index Insurance Program, or SIPE for short, focuses on vulnerable pastoralists. And we were very happy to have this initiative studied quite closely by the SIPRI partnership. Now, for both R4 and SIPE, alongside food transfers, we provide vulnerable households with access to weather index insurance and other financial services delivered on digital platforms, plus improved production technologies and expanded choices in key markets for goods and services. All of this in exchange for contributing to the construction and rehabilitating of assets in their own communities, typically through enhanced management of soil and water resources. The results are very encouraging, where we see improved resilience to climate shocks, enhanced food and nutrition security, creation and protection of key assets, financial inclusion, livelihood and income diversification, while also contributing to efforts to transform the national environment, and critically for the peace agenda in our discussion today, help set vulnerable communities and regions on pathways toward greater stability and enhanced cohesion.
Thank you so much.
Thus far, we have reached 300,000 farmers, and we aim to reach 1 million more next year. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vera. Given the complexity on the ground and the number of people affected, I must say I was very encouraged to hear that you were able to find sweet spots and that you also had encouraging results. And we can come back to that later in the panel discussion, I believe. Thank you so much. Comfort Aero, the international crisis group, works to prevent war and shape policies that will help build a more peaceful world. Comfort Aero, how does crisis group see the relationship between food security and conflict?
Thank you, and thank you for the question, and also thank you for inviting me to the panel. I think Valerie's opening remarks just hit the nail on the head when you listen very carefully to the statistics that she provided. 60% of the world's population live in conflict. 2/3 of WFP's work is taking place in conflict arenas. So for crisis groups' perspective, our work is to sound the bell, warn early about conflicts and try to sort of get international action towards those conflicts. For us, we see conflict as being at the heart of the food security, which is why we welcome the conversation that WFP is having today. We also see very clearly, and we've seen it, whether it's in Somalia, in Sudan, for example, how conflict harms subsistence agriculture, for example, how it harms cereal production, livestock, or even decimates food industries that have been nationalized. So, for example, we witnessed, our research showed that things like milk and bread in Venezuela had been disrupted as a result of conflict and insecurity in that crisis. We've also seen our own research how conflict actors divert food aid, for their own side in the conflict. They often deny it to their enemy. They use hunger as a weapon, pretty much in every conflict area that we work in. Again, whether it's in Somalia, whether it's in Sudan, whether it's in Ethiopia, where our WFP country director was just talking about, even in Syria, in Yemen, local elites capture aid distribution. Armed groups profit from aid distribution. Warring factions themselves manipulate and use access of food as an instrument of war as well. And we've also seen that conflict affects the demand for food, that is the ability of people, for example, to purchase the food that is around. This is particularly in that it depletes people's margins of dealing with shocks such as droughts and blocked access. So in every single conflict zones, we've seen just how the supply of food, access to food, food insecurity, how that is really at the center of a lot of the crisis that we're focusing on. And so another point to make is also that food and the fuel to deliver it is often taxed in war environments by the different warring factions. And so for example, I'll give you a very good example. We're currently in crisis group, we're working on a report on Yemen about the economics of war there in that particular crisis. And there, what we've noticed is that, the war economy may outlast the military war itself. So one of the conclusions that we've drawn, for example, from the study that we've done in Yemen, among other things, is that the currency manipulation is the most important reason for hunger in that conflict as well, which is especially prevalent in the country's south, for example. If you want to deal with food insecurity, you have to deal with the underlying economic conflict drivers. And this is partly also why we believe that this relationship that we're building with WFP to help come to a deeper understanding of these dynamics is crucial to support WFP's own efforts to contribute to a peaceful outcome in these conflict scenarios. So I'll stop there to keep my intervention short, because I know you've got other, and we'll have an interesting panel discussion later as well.
Yes. Thank you so much, Comfort. It was really interesting to listen to you and all the aspects that you're working on. I was about to ask you what the crisis group was hoping to get out of the partnership with the WFP, but I think you already answered that, didn't you? That you were talking about a deeper understanding.
Good, and yes, because both organizations, we're interested in saving lives, we're interested in supporting vulnerable societies, and the reason why the World Food Programme, came to Crisis Group, and why we want that relationship as well, is because we see it as a win-win situation. WFP wants to address vulnerable populations. Crisis groups' work is about preventing and sounding the bell early and ensuring that all the multiple actors that are in the field have a deep understanding of the conflict dynamics and that their work in intervening in those crises does no harm. And for that basis, the relationship between crisis group and the World Food Programme at this particular juncture is even more crucial. And the reason why I think it's also crucial is that the conflict landscape has been changing, and food security is at the heart of what you can call conflict 300, for example. First, you had states that were the main actors, the main conflict actors. After 9/11, we saw the growth of non-state actors. And today, both these kind of sort of conflict actors are still with us, but you have other actorless threats that we're seeing. And food insecurity sits at the intersection of the three sort of actorless crises. So Dan Smith has emphasized, for example, climate and climatic shocks. The other sort of 301 sort of conflict that we have today, actorless conflict, is the health global pandemic, which we're all having to grapple with. And tied to that is inequality. The long tail of COVID has further exposed the inequalities that we see in a number of countries, particularly those fragile or conflict affected states. So it's a new partnership with the WFP to help both of us, both our institution, address these new actorless threats that are now affecting a lot of the countries that we're working in. And just one thing that I'd like to point out is, about our partnership is the partnership was also born out of our interaction in the field, WFP staff, the conversations that both our organizations had in the Sahel, for example, at a time when WFP was ramping up its own visibility, particularly in Burkina Faso, which we warned about as a deteriorating threat, and in South Sudan as well, and in Cameroon, and also in Venezuela. And it was that conversation in the midst of the crisis that clarified our partnership with the World Food Programme.
Thank you so much. We'll come back to you afterwards, again, as you said in the panel. Betty Bigome, thank you for your patience. We've heard that the main driver of food insecurity is conflict, and it's on the rise. You have played a key role in several conflict resolutions throughout Africa. And you have led the peace process in northern Uganda and are currently involved in South Sudan. Can you tell us from your experience, what are the key ingredients for successful conflict resolutions?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. But I also must point out that the system has not been steady. I've been locked out from time to time, and I've had to reboot and then open again. I hope there won't be such interruptions. That said, I was advised not to talk about this, but I thought it's still worth mentioning the fact that the Nobel Peace Prize award last year went to World Food Programme. I think this is commendable. Commendable, me as a recipient of some small time awards, I always feel guilty because those who contributed, I know that alone I could never do it. And they're oftentimes left out. And I think this is great that we're now looking at organizations recognizing their huge contributions. These are unsung heroes. And I think it's important because it also speaks to promoting teams. It also speaks to what we usually preach about, that is inclusivity in peace processes. So let's include everybody in recognition. Thank you. I'm going to talk mainly about my experience in northern Uganda and now South Sudan on how provision of humanitarian assistance, or food, if you will, has contributed to giving hope, saving lives. When I first got involved in northern Uganda, the first shock was I hadn't realized that starvation actually kills. There's starvation which kills, but that makes people who are starved very vulnerable to other diseases. I saw how many children were dropping dead. We are still seeing this in Yemen. We are still seeing it in Syria and in South. And consequently, contribution, the nexus between peace and conflict resolution, it's very, very close. In northern Uganda, let me start with that. First of all, we had to have we negotiated and persuaded World Food Program to provide food for schools in internally displaced camps or in refugees camps. This made a huge impact. In the first place, it was a form of incentive for children to go to school because they were assured of at least 1 meal a day. We could also see the rapid change in the health of these kids. I could clearly see, I was urging women to participate in the peace process, but there was no way they could because they had other shows, and the major one was provision of food to their families. And the moment when the program really picked up, women then had time to participate in peace processes. And it's not just that, it gave them hope that somebody somewhere is thinking about them. So provision of food, the nexus between food and conflict resolution, I've seen it in real life, how it has worked. It's not only that. If we look at all these peace talks, the negotiations that are going on, there's always demand of access to food, access to food in either internally displaced camps or in refugees camps, mainly by non-state actors. Often this is granted. It's also sends a very strong signal that the other faction or the other party is ready to engage in a different way and not bent on punishing people, the other faction, so to speak. So it is a form of incentive to get the parties to keep engaged. It's one of the very key basic necessity that provides incentives to the parties. And as I said earlier on, the participation of women, when that show is lifted away from them, that they're able to participate. It's not even only that. We have to look at it that women in camps and internally displaced camps always venture out to go to the field to look for food to feed their families. In the process, some of them get blown by landmines. Some of them get raped in the process. So the provision of food, wherever they are, even in squalid camps, keep them together, keep them out of that danger that can be avoided. I also think it is important that I should say something about the UN resolution 2417, which I think is excellent, is perfect. But me as a peace activist get very frustrated. Get frustrated that this is a fantastic document. It's very well written, documented, researched, and all that. But the language that is used in this resolution is we urge the parties to allow access for humanitarian assistance. We let me look at all the languages, beautiful diplomatic languages that are usually huge. I mean, used for the non-state actors. Now, this does not really drive the point home. It does not bite those who prevent access, block access to delivery of humanitarian assistance. If the resolution was bold and strong and comes out clearly to state that the consequences of not allowing access is A, B, C, D, E. Recently, I was in South Sudan, and we had this discussion. This is on the present day Europe, and my topic was about sanctions, how effective they are, and whether they work or not. And South Sudan, you probably know, that has the highest number of government officials that are sanctioned. So I was able to interact with them and see the impact of it. Now I'm bringing this in because if this resolution goes as far as stating clearly that prevention of or blocking of access for humanitarian assistance is a big crime because it causes death, it causes all kinds of sufferings, and therefore if you do, you are liable for certain kind of punishments and within certain time frame, so that it doesn't fall on deaf ears, begging them, make them respond to what is beautifully articulated. We want it to have an impact. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Betty. This was it's incredible to listen to all your efforts. I have actually been to Lira a number of times in northern Uganda, and I've seen for myself the importance of everything you're talking about. It was devastating, actually, to see the situation for the internally displaced up in northern Uganda some years ago. Well, may I invite the whole panel back on the screen, and then we will have a panel discussion. I guess the five of you could have discussed the whole day different aspects around food security and peace, but unfortunately we only have 10 minutes left. So in order to keep the time, I think I will ask you some questions and then beg you to be quite precise and pointed in your answers. Dan, first a question to you, since you work in Sweden. How do you see the opportunities for World Food Programme to use the Nobel Peace Prize to further build on its work?
Well, I think that the WFP has become a clear leader in this field on the relationship between food and peace. I don't mean, a research leader. I mean a leader in terms of the global political discourse and understanding. And so I think that one of the most important things for WFP to be doing is to be, how can I say this in a polite way? Valerie, we get on well, so you know that I'm not being rude or critical about this, but you have to have your act together in every detail. You have to be working as a program to ensure that what you do on the ground, that nobody can poke holes there and see that there's something that's gone wrong and that you're not thinking about stuff properly. You've got to be bringing in at the cutting edge, at the leading edge of impact assessment to understand the peace building effects that you're having. And you need to be taking part in the global policy in a really clear and direct way. You asked me to be pointed, and I guess I was.
Thank you. Comfort. You were talking about access to food as and all the conflicts at the heart of the food insecurity. What are the main threats on the African continent now, as you see it? Conflict will lead to food insecurity or even famine, from your perspective.
Thank you very much for the question. And it's worth noting that when the Nobel Peace Prize was announced, David Beasley was in Niger. And as an early warning conflict prevention organization, that was very instructive, because that country has faced both the threat of the spreading jihadi insurgency from Mali, also facing its own sort of intercommunal border tensions in its surrounding neighborhood. And for us, in terms of where we would look to today in terms of threats and where we would warn, Niger, the Sahel would continue to be on our radar. The other sort of main sort of threats that I see, sadly, are the very countries that the Secretary mentioned in 2018 when he declared famine in 4 African countries: South Sudan, Somalia, three African countries: South Sudan, Somalia, and Nigeria. Those still remain very much high on the radar, and it's partly why we wrote the briefings that we wrote in response to that, called the Instruments of Pain. Specifically on South Sudan, where Madame Betty Bigome is the envoy, she knows this very well, better than me. We are actually in the 10th year of that country's independence from Sudan, and that country's problems are getting deeper and deeper. Years of civil war have devastated the country, leaving, just short of 500,000 people dead, displaced, 4 million people displaced, and every Sudanese themselves is in fear of poor access to food. So South Sudan requires massive sort of food aid and prevention. The other country that I still see as a major threat in terms of violence, the threat from armed combatants in Somalia. But I want to focus in, because of our colleague, the country director of the World Food Programme, to say that for me, where I fear conflict will lead to food insecurity or even famine, we're already seeing that unfolding in Ethiopia's Tigray region. Fighting, that broke out since the 4th of November. There have been various warning bells, concerns, even from WFP, about the real threat for this war to provoke famine. But Tigray is just one center of violence in Ethiopia. There are other multiple centers of violence in that country, and I think WFP, have done well to focus in on that. And I think a number of the humanitarian agencies have put a spotlight on the fact that up to 4.5 million people in Tigray alone, a region of 6 million, are in acute need of sort of emergency food supplies. So already we're living in the very threat that we're talking about. And there are other threats that I've put on the table. One to watch: a country that's already facing climatic shocks, facing now a new emerging insurgency, is Mozambique, a country where the UN invested significant amount in trying to end the conflict there, and now we're seeing real sort of desperate situation with a new emergency unfolding there. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Vere, since Ethiopia was mentioned, can you, seen from your chair, will we achieve a zero hunger and stable world by 2030? Can you answer very quickly on that one? Or it's a big question, I understand that.
We continue. Thank you for the very difficult question. We continue to hope. We continue to hope. And one thing that we have come to understand is the non-linearity that comes with peace. When peace comes, things change very quickly. And so efforts to address peace and break that link between conflict and food insecurity, the more successful they are, I think the greater the chance we have to reach there. Now, I think because of the size of those changes that can emerge when peace comes, I remain optimistic. That isn't all that we need to do, and as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot more to be done. For instance, Somali region now is largely peaceful in Ethiopia, largely peaceful, but we have 2.4 million people still requiring humanitarian food assistance this year. What is required is creation of the kinds of platforms that I was describing earlier, where we bring together different forms of support to communities and give them new choices. so that the reliance and dependence on food assistance can be averted, and they can then pull themselves into stability, cohesion, and food security. So I am optimistic because of what we see can happen in a place like Somali region in Ethiopia, where now the prospects look so positive for the years to come.
Thank you. Betty, you were talking about, you were quite frustrated about Resolution 2417 as it was not doing enough. But another thing that I also noticed, you were talking about women, what hindered them in participating in peace process and what we could get out of involving them. Could you very, very short, because we're running out of time, but I'd really like to hear what you say, what can we all do to work harder to integrate more women in peace-building efforts? Can you very short give us something to work on?
Yeah, thank you very much. Lately, I've been seeing the grassroots women in South Sudan, the effort they're making on their own without any support. And how can we empower them? For example, before they go out to reconcile their communities or even talk to their children to give up fighting, how can we empower them so that they have food to put on the table before they can go out on these duties? These are women who are giving their time, who are begging for looking for opportunity to live in dignity. They're doing the little that they can do with their communities, but without much recognition, without any capacity building, and economically, at least to be able to put food on the table before they go. I've watched these women with maybe one cloth to wear during the day. She washes it in the morning, looks for food to put on the table, and she's going to another camp to meet with other women to reconcile their respective communities. There's a lot of potential in there.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Betty.
But we're not investing enough. We're not investing enough.
No, thank you so much. Based on today's discussion, Valerie, what is the most important step forward in translating this enhanced understanding into action on the ground? And very short, I'm sorry about that, but time is running out.
Well, just to say, look, the way needs are growing, we need to be investing in prevention. Prevention always, humanitarian when necessary, development whenever possible. This needs to be our mantra, and we need to make that real on the ground. Simultaneously doing no harm while investing in doing good. And as Dan was highlighting, this can't be an ad hoc approach. It needs to be systematic from the planning through to the implementation, and then that evidence that shows that things are working. And then the last point really is on partnerships. And we talk a lot about, partnerships with, other international organizations, local organizations, and that's key. I think, some of the exciting things we've been showcasing here is how, the partnership with SIPRI, that's a knowledge partnership, the partnership we've now formed with the International Crisis Group, which is, helping us to more systematically incorporate conflict sensitivity in our work. These kind of partnerships are fundamental as well, and we need to be working together if we are going to be reducing conflict and building the better prospects for peace.
Thank you so much, Valerie. And on that note, working together and bringing down the silos, I want to introduce our next talk. So thank you so much to the panel. It's been really lovely, interesting, and also a little bit heartbreaking, I must say, to listen to you today, but mostly quite inspiring, and I have a hope for a better future. So next dialogue in this series will be on June 17th. From 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock Central European time, and it's about breaking down the silos, how cooperation and cooperative approach to the humanitarian development peace nexus. So please stay tuned, join us on June 17th, and thank you so much for everybody, to all of you that was watching us today, and thank you to the lovely panel that I had the honor of moderating. And stay tuned.